The bus lurches, and Clara, mid-sentence in her internal debate about whether a third coffee is excessive or essential, nearly faceplants into the backpack of the man in front of her. He's new to the 7:15 a.m. express, or at least, new to her notice. He's quiet, an island of stillness in the usual commuter sea of frantic texters and earbud cocoon zombies. He's also, she observes as she regains her balance with a muttered apology, trying to read a book that looks suspiciously like a corporate annual report, and failing, because the print is microscopic and the bus driver seems to be auditioning for a demolition derby. Rough ride for fine print, she offers, a small smile playing on her lips. He looks up, startled, and his eyes, a surprising shade of clear, thoughtful gray, meet hers. There's a weariness in them that tugs at something in her. It is, he agrees, his voice low, a pleasant rumble. He closes the report with a sigh. Not exactly compelling in way. Clara, emboldened by a shared moment of public transit suffering, rummages in her own oversized tote. I have a spare, she says, pulling out a slightly battered copy of Siddhartha. It's much better for bumpy rides. And philosophical contemplation, if that's your thing. He hesitates, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Surprise? Suspicion? Oh, I couldn't. Please, she insists, pressing it into his hand. Consider it a public service. No one should be forced to read corporate jargon on a Tuesday. She winks. Clara, by the way. A ghost of a smile touches his lips. Arthur. And thank you, Clara. That's very kind. He thumbs the cover, his fingers long and slender. I'll take good care of it. The bus shudders to her stop. My station, she says, gathering her things. Enjoy the journey, Arthur. Literally, and, metaphorically. He nods, that quiet smile lingering. I will. I'll return it, same route. Sounds like a plan. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe love should feel like freedom, hit that like button and subscribe. As Clara steps onto the pavement, the bus pulling away, she replays the brief encounter. Arthur. He had a nice name to go with those kind, tired eyes. There was something about him, a gentle gravity that was oddly compelling. She had no idea he was about to become the lead story on the nightly news, or that her small act of literary kindness was the first thread in a tangle she couldn't have imagined. And just like that, a stranger with kind eyes and a borrowed book had lodged himself firmly in her thoughts, a pleasant mystery she hoped the universe might, just once, solve for her. Clara's days usually followed a predictable, comforting rhythm. She worked as an archivist at the city library, a job that suited her love for stories and the quiet company of the past. Her small apartment, filled with precariously stacked books and a slightly aloof tabby cat named Gatsby, was her sanctuary. Life wasn't wildly exciting, but it was hers, curated with care after a period of noisy chaos she was glad to have put behind her. She cherished the predictable drone of the bus, the familiar faces, the luxury of uninterrupted reading time. The encounter with Arthur had been a small, pleasant ripple in this calm pond. She thought about him intermittently throughout the day, the way his hand had brushed hers when he took the book, the quiet intensity in his gaze. It was silly, really. A brief exchange, nothing more. Yet there was a pull, a curiosity that hummed beneath the surface of her routine tasks. She found herself wondering what he did, why he looked so tired, if he was enjoying Hessa. That evening, after microwaving a surprisingly decent lasagna and settling onto her worn couch with Gatsby purring like a tiny motor beside her, Clara idly flipped through the channels. She usually avoided the news. It was often too loud, too grim. But tonight, a familiar face caught her eye, making her pause mid-channel surf. It was Arthur. Her Arthur. The quiet man from the bus. Only he wasn't quiet now. His image was frozen on the screen, a headline blazing beneath it. Terra Nova whistleblower faces corporate backlash. The photo was clearly a candid shot, him looking strained, caught off guard, but unmistakably the man to whom she'd lent Siddhartha just that morning. Clara's lasagna went cold on her lap. Gatsby, sensing the shift in her stillness, blinked his golden eyes at her. The news anchor was speaking in urgent, somber tones about a massive data leak, environmental violations, and a brave employee who had risked everything to bring the truth to light. Terra Nova Energy was a behemoth in their city, a company whose gleaming downtown tower was a symbol of progress and prosperity. Or so everyone thought. Arthur, the reporter explained, was a mid-level data analyst who had uncovered evidence of illegal dumping of toxic waste and systematic falsification of environmental impact reports. He had tried to go through internal channels, been ignored, then threatened, and had finally taken his evidence to the press. Terranova was, predictably, denying everything and launching a full-scale campaign to discredit him. He was being painted as a disgruntled employee, unstable, a fabricator. Clara stared at the screen, her heart thumping. The tired eyes now made a different kind of sense. The corporate report he'd been trying to read, was it Terranova's? The quietness wasn't just a personality trait. It was the demeanor of a man carrying an immense burden, a man walking through a storm. Her first instinct was a wave of protective anger on his behalf. Her second was a jolt of fear, for him, and a tiny, selfish flicker for herself. What had she stumbled into? This was so far removed from her world of dusty archives and literary discussions. He wasn't just a quiet commuter. He was a man in the eye of a hurricane. She thought of the book in his hands. Siddhartha, a story of seeking truth, of finding one's own path against the current. The irony wasn't lost on her. He was living a far more dramatic version of that search. A sudden, absurd thought struck her. Would he still be on the bus tomorrow? Would he even remember her? Or the book, amidst this chaos? The news report ended, cutting to a commercial for laundry detergent, the jarring transition underscoring the surreal nature of it all. Clara turned off the TV, the silence of her apartment suddenly feeling too large. The pleasant mystery had been solved, all right, but the solution was far more complex and troubling than she could have imagined. She picked up her cold lasagna, her appetite gone. The quiet man from the bus was now a figure of public drama, and her small, peaceful world felt irrevocably altered by the brief intersection of their paths. The next few days, Clara boarded the 7:15 a.m. express with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She scanned the faces, half expecting, half dreading to see Arthur. He wasn't there. The seat he'd occupied was taken by a woman meticulously applying mascara, her elbow jutting perilously close to the head of the man beside her. Clara found herself strangely disappointed, a feeling she quickly tried to squash. It was ridiculous. She barely knew him. And yet, she followed the story online, of course. Articles painted conflicting pictures. Some hailed Arthur as a hero, a David against Goliath. Others, likely fueled by Terranova's aggressive PR machine, portrayed him as an attention seeker, a liar. There were pap shots of him looking harried, trying to dodge reporters outside what looked like a modest apartment building. Each image made the knot in Clara's stomach tighten. He looked hunted. A week after their first encounter, on a gray, drizzly morning, she saw him. He was huddled by the bus stop, not in the shelter, but just outside it, as if trying to make himself smaller, less visible. He wore a baseball cap pulled low and his collar turned up, but she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself. He looked thinner, the weariness in his eyes now a profound exhaustion that even the shadows of the cap couldn't hide. Her heart did a strange flip-flop. She almost didn't approach him. What could she possibly say? Hi, loved your whistleblower segment on Channel 5? But then he looked up, his gaze sweeping past her, then snapping back, a flicker of recognition, quickly followed by something like alarm. Clara took a breath and walked over. Arthur. He flinched almost imperceptibly. Clara, he said, his voice even lower than before, strained. Hello. He was holding her copy of Siddhartha, looking a little more battered than when she'd given it to him. You still have it, she said, managing a small smile. An awkward silence hung between them, thick with unspoken things. The drizzle was starting to turn into a proper rain. I meant to return it sooner, he said, his gaze darting around as if expecting a reporter to leap from behind a nearby hedge. Things have been complicated. I can imagine, Clara said softly. I saw the news. His shoulders slumped a little. Right, of course. He looked down at the book in his hands. Probably not the best first impression. Quiet man on the bus, fugitive from corporate justice. A wry, tired smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Actually, Clara said, my first impression was that you had kind eyes and needed a better book. He looked up then, a genuine spark of surprise in his gaze. You still think so? About the eyes in the book? Definitely. The bus rumbled to a halt beside them, its doors hissing open. Look, this probably isn't the place. But if you ever want to talk to someone who isn't a lawyer or a journalist, or just needs another book recommendation. She trailed off, feeling suddenly presumptuous. Arthur hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. There's a small coffee shop, the Daily Grind, a few blocks from here. I sometimes go there. It's usually quiet. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. I know it, Clara said. Tomorrow morning? Before the world wakes up. A flicker of something that might have been relief crossed his face. Tomorrow morning would be good. He clutched the book a little tighter. Thank you, Clara. As they boarded the bus, taking separate seats this time, Clara felt a strange mix of trepidation and a quiet, determined warmth. He was still the man from the news, embroiled in a dangerous fight. But he was also Arthur, the man with kind eyes, who was now trusting her, just a little, with a sliver of his embattled peace. The Daily Grind was a haven of worn armchairs and the rich scent of roasted beans. Clara arrived early, nursing a chamomile tea, her nerves aflutter. When Arthur walked in, he looked marginally better than he had at the bus stop. He'd foregone the cap, and though the shadows under his eyes were still pronounced, there was a fraction less tension in his shoulders. He spotted her in a quiet corner booth and offered a tentative smile. Thanks for coming. Thanks for suggesting it, she replied, gesturing to the seat opposite her. My treat. What can I get you? Just black coffee, please. Strong. As she waited for his coffee, she watched him. He sat with a stillness that was less about composure and more about a deep, bone-weary fatigue. He was tracing the rim of his empty cup with a finger, his gaze distant. When she returned with his coffee, he wrapped his hands around the warm mug as if it were a lifeline. So, Clara began gently, how are you holding up? Really? Arthur took a long sip of coffee before answering. It's a lot, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. One day you're just doing your job, trying to make sense of spreadsheets, and the next, you're public enemy number one to a multi-billion-dollar corporation and a reluctant local celebrity. He gave a humorless laugh. My mother is alternating between being terrified for me and incredibly proud. It's confusing for everyone. I can't even imagine, Clara said. What they're saying about you, it's awful. He shrugged, a gesture of weary resignation. It's what they do. Muddy the waters, discredit the source. I expected it. I just didn't expect how relentless it would be. The reporters camped outside my apartment, the calls, the online comments. He shuddered. People can be incredibly cruel when they're anonymous, and incredibly brave when they're not, Clara countered softly. What you did, that took immense courage, Arthur. He looked at her then, a long, searching look. Or immense foolishness. The line feels very thin some days. He sighed. I miss just being Arthur, the guy who likes quiet mornings and has an overdue library book. He gestured to Siddhartha, which he'd placed on the table between them. Speaking of which, I did read it. It was strangely relevant. Truth-seeking tends to be a timeless theme, Clara smiled. Though perhaps your version has more lawyers involved. A genuine smile finally reached his eyes. Just a few. And a very persistent PR firm trying to get me to do a tell-all interview with a talk show host who looks like a Ken doll. Clara chuckled. Resist the Ken doll. His questions are probably written by Terranova anyway. That's what my lawyer said, Arthur admitted, the smile lingering. It's just, I'm not built for this, Clara. I like order, data, things that make sense. This is chaos. And I feel like I've dragged everyone I know into it, even peripherally. His gaze flickered to her. Sorry for making our bus encounter part of my ongoing drama. Don't be, she said earnestly. For what it's worth, I'm glad I lent you the book. And I'm glad you're here. They talked for over an hour. He didn't delve into the specifics of the case. He was clearly well coached by his lawyers, but he spoke about the isolation, the pressure, the feeling of his life being hijacked. Clara mostly listened, offering quiet support, an occasional observation, a shared moment of exasperated humor at the absurdity of his situation. She told him a little about her work, her cat, her own appreciation for the quiet corners of life. It was a fragile bubble of normalcy in the midst of his storm. As they were leaving, Arthur paused at the door. This helped Clara. More than you know. Just to talk to someone who doesn't want something from me. Anytime, she said, meaning it. And Arthur, he looked at her. You're not foolish. You're brave. Don't let them make you doubt that. He held her gaze for a moment, a complex mix of gratitude and something else, something deeper, in his eyes. I'll try not to. Over the next few weeks, their coffee meetings became a tentative routine. Sometimes they talked about his case, a new legal maneuver by Terranova, a supportive editorial in an independent paper. Other times, they didn't mention it at all, discussing books, movies, the ridiculousness of local politics, the best place to get a decent croissant. Clara learned that Arthur had a dry wit, a passion for old maps, and an encyclopedic knowledge of obscure jazz musicians. He learned that Clara could quote entire scenes from classic films, had a surprisingly competitive streak when it came to Scrabble, discovered via a travel set one rainy morning, and made a truly terrible cup of coffee. A fact he teased her about mercilessly after she once brought in a thermos of her home-brewed sludge. She saw the toll the relentless pressure was taking on him. There were days he was withdrawn, his smile strained. Terranova was playing hardball, leaking doctored emails, trying to dig up dirt from his past. A particularly nasty article appeared in a city tabloid, filled with anonymous sources questioning his mental stability. Clara found him that morning staring blankly into his coffee cup, the tabloid discarded on the table beside him. "Hey," she said softly, sliding into the booth. "Don't read that garbage." "It's hard not to," he said, his voice flat. "What if they're right? What if I'm just tilting at windmills? Delusional." Clara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. His skin was cold. "Arthur, look at me." He slowly raised his eyes. "You know the truth. The people who matter know the truth. This," she tapped the tabloid with a disdainful finger, "is just noise. Desperate noise from people who are scared of what you've exposed." His fingers curled slightly around hers. "I wish I had your certainty." "Then borrow some of mine," she said, squeezing his hand. "I've got plenty to spare." He managed a weak smile. "You're good for me, Clara. Like a human antidote to corporate venom." "Happy to be of service," she said, her own smile a little watery. She was becoming fiercely protective of him, of the quiet, principled man beneath the reluctant whistleblower persona. Her feelings for him were deepening, shifting from sympathy to something warmer, more complex, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to entertain for a very long time. It was terrifying, given the circumstances, but also undeniably real. The turning point came on a blustery autumn afternoon. Arthur called her, his voice tight with a strange urgency. "Can you meet?" "Not the coffee shop. My place. It's important." His apartment was small, sparsely furnished, but neat. Books were everywhere, more organized than Clara's own chaotic piles. He paced as he spoke, agitated. "They offered me a settlement," he said, finally stopping in front of the window, looking out at the gray cityscape. "Terranova. A substantial one. Enough to disappear. Live comfortably. Never work again if I didn't want to." Clara felt a chill. And I have to sign an NDA. A comprehensive one. Retract my statements. Essentially, admit I was lying, or mistaken, or temporarily insane. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and despair. "They want to buy my silence, Clara. They want to erase the truth." "What did your lawyers say?" "He said it's a good offer, financially. He said it would make all this go away. The media, the threats, the stress." Arthur ran a hand through his hair. "He said I should take it. That I've done enough, that I can't win against them in the long run." Clara was silent for a moment, her heart aching for him. The pressure must be unbearable. "And what do you want to do, Arthur?" He looked at her, his gaze raw. "I don't know. A part of me, a very tired, very scared part of me, just wants it to be over. I want my life back. I want to be able to walk down the street without looking over my shoulder." He gestured around the small apartment. "I want to not feel like a prisoner in my own home." "But," Clara prompted gently. "But if I take it, they win," he said, his voice dropping. "The dumping continues. The lies continue. And I become just another part of their machine, another problem neatly solved with money." He walked over to a small table where her copy of Siddhartha lay, its cover now soft with wear. He picked it up, his thumb tracing the faded title. "What's the point of seeking truth if you sell it for peace and quiet?" Clara felt a surge of pride, so strong it almost choked her. "There's a difference between peace and quiet, Arthur, and just silence." He met her eyes. "I know. That's the hell of it." He put the book down. "There's a journalist, a reputable one, from a national paper. She's been wanting to do an in-depth story, give me a platform to lay out all the evidence, everything Terranova is trying to bury. My lawyer advised against it, said it would be like throwing gasoline on a fire." "And what do you think?" Clara asked. "I think," Arthur said slowly, a new light dawning in his eyes, a spark of the fire she knew was in him, that some fires need to burn. He took a deep breath. "But it's a huge risk. They'll come after me with everything they have. It will get much, much worse before it gets better. If it ever gets better." He looked directly at her, his vulnerability an open wound. "And I can't. I wouldn't ask anyone to stand in that fire with me." Clara walked over to him, stopping just inches away. She could see the exhaustion etched into his face, but also a nascent resolve. "Arthur," she said, her voice firm but gentle, "you're not asking. But for what it's worth, if you decide to light that match, I'll be here. Not in the fire, maybe, but I'll bring the marshmallows for afterwards." A choked laugh escaped him. Tears welled in his eyes, and he didn't try to hide them. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Why are you so good?" "Maybe I just recognize a fellow traveler," she whispered back, leaning into his touch. Someone trying to find their way. The air between them crackled, no longer with tension, but with a fragile, powerful intimacy. He searched her eyes, and what he found there seemed to solidify his decision. The lines of conflict on his face eased, replaced by a quiet determination. "Okay," he said, his voice stronger now. "Okay. I'm going to call that journalist." He took a step back, but his hand lingered on her arm. "Thank you, Clara. For everything. For the book. For the coffee. For not letting me take the easy way out." "You wouldn't have," she said with certainty. "It's not who you are." The confrontation wasn't with Terranova's lawyers in a sterile boardroom, nor was it a dramatic showdown in a courtroom. It happened in Arthur's small living room, with the city lights beginning to prick the darkening sky outside. It was the quiet, resolute click of his phone as he ended the call with the journalist, a woman whose voice had sounded both professional and deeply empathetic. "It's done," he said, turning to Clara, a profound weariness mixed with an undeniable relief on his face. "The interview is set for next week. On the record. All of it." Clara didn't say anything, just nodded, her heart swelling. He had chosen the harder path, the one of integrity, and she had never been more certain of the man he was. He walked towards her, stopping so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint, familiar scent of coffee and old paper that always clung to him. "I'm terrified," he admitted, his voice a low murmur. "I know," she said, equally softly. "And I'm also strangely calm." He looked down at her, his gray eyes, usually so full of shadows, now clear and direct. "Clara, these past few weeks, you've been..." He struggled for words, a rare occurrence for the articulate data analyst. "You've been my anchor, my North Star. When everything else was spinning out of control, you were just there. Real." Her breath hitched. "Arthur." He reached out, his hands finding hers, lacing their fingers together. They felt strong, steady. "I know this is insane timing. My life is a dumpster fire wrapped in a public relations nightmare. And I have absolutely nothing to offer you except more chaos, probably." A wry, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "But when this is quieter, if it ever gets quieter." Clara's heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild, joyful rhythm. She brought her free hand up to his cheek, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "it's already quieter. Right here." He leaned down then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway, her eyes fluttering closed as his lips found hers. It wasn't a kiss of fiery passion, not yet. It was a kiss of immense relief, of profound gratitude, of a deep and abiding connection forged in the unlikely crucible of corporate malfeasance and shared cups of coffee. It was soft and tender and tasted of hope and the promise of dawn after a long, dark night. When they finally drew apart, breathless, they simply looked at each other, a universe of unspoken understanding passing between them. The city hummed outside, indifferent to the small, monumental shift that had just occurred within those four walls. The storm wasn't over for Arthur, not by a long shot. The interview would undoubtedly unleash a fresh wave of attacks from Terranova. But looking at him now, seeing the quiet strength that had replaced the hunted look in his eyes, Clara knew he would face it. And he wouldn't be facing it alone. A few days later, after the interview had aired and the expected corporate denials and counter-accusations had begun to fly, Clara found Arthur on their bus, the 7:15 a.m. express. He was in his usual seat by the window, no longer trying to hide, but simply looking out at the passing city. He wasn't reading. She slid into the seat beside him. "Morning," she said softly. He turned, and the smile that lit his face was genuine, reaching deep into his kind, tired eyes. "Morning, Clara." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers naturally, comfortably. "Siddhartha found his river," he said, his gaze warm. I think I might have found mine too." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, the familiar rumble of the bus a comforting backdrop. The journey was far from over, the waters ahead likely still turbulent. But for the first time in a long time, for both of them, the path felt clear, and the company, perfect. He was still Arthur, the quiet man from the bus, but now, she knew the symphony beneath the silence, and it was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. Thanks for watching. If you believe in second chances and real love, give this story a like and subscribe for more.